what are we doing within our operation in a time where margins are getting pretty slim, and how do we adjust to that? So I think when they ask about who were cow-calf operators versus stocker operators, I think that brings up an interesting point. And as we would expect, the majority of us in this part of the world are usually cow-calf operators. However, you know, back when I was an ag banker, a lot of my customers were stocker operators. And despite what folks believe, you know, we're not strictly we're not glued to just having wheat pasture to run stockers and make some money. And so I think that as we look at moving forward with our operations, as these margins get tighter over time and feed and land prices and all those things get up, we're going to have to look at being a little more versatile and not just running calves and selling them and thinking we're going to make a bunch of money at 400 pounds. And I think that operations and looking at things like this will certainly help us in that regard. So to hit a little bit on what Jeff talked about on the OQBM program, you know, you see that premium at about, you know, 12 bucks average or more on the lighter cattle. You know, that's certainly something you sit back and think about. Well, it's I'm going to call it $10 for easy math in our heads, but you know, a $5 calf or a 500-pound calf and $10 a head, that's only 50 bucks. Okay, well, that's a premium for going through all that work. So is it worth it? And I would stress to you that there's a couple of things that doesn't tell you. As we think about that, if we're selling off those lighter calves and let's say we get 15 bucks or something to that side of things, obviously that boosts our premium. But what that also doesn't tell us is that those results and those premiums are located at one specific day and time. So that's a November 15th sale date. That's the difference on that day, backgrounded cattle, OQB cattle versus non. That doesn't tell the whole story, because if we go back and look at the past 2 decades, we generally see a positive price move in the market as a whole from early October to the end of December. Okay, and so as we see this big fall calf run, which hadn't quite started yet this year, it always floats in that October, November time frame, depending on the year. As we see that big calf run hit and we see those prices come down as we flood the market with balling calves, okay, when we're undertaking one of these programs, we're moving out of that bottom. And so normally we'll see a positive price move in the market as a whole from that time that you would have been selling straight off a cow to that point where we've got a 60-day backgrounded calf to sell. So we've got, you know, obviously added weight gain. We get a dollar value boost per head of that OQBN premium, but we've also got that seasonal price move in the background. So that $10 to $15 could pretty quickly turn into maybe $20. And now we're starting to say, okay, now we've got a positive price move there. We've got some margin to work with. Can I get those cattle there for 50 bucks and then I make another 50 bucks a head? I mean, those are, when we think about how that plays out in application, that's something that we've sure got to be thinking about. And so when we talk about this trial in particular, if we use kind of Paul's numbers and we use them as a building block point on what we've got on those cattle, these cattle were around for about 150 days. If we think we're going to get 1/4 of a pound improvement in terms of average daily gain over that period, we're dealing with some pretty significant weight and margin on top of what may be happening from just our profit margin as it sits. And so in this case, if we just do some rough math, if we're looking at 1/4 of a pound a day on 150 days, that's almost 40 pounds difference versus the treated cattle versus your control cattle. And if we just throw in $1.50 as a sale mark on that, we're already looking at a price margin of just under $60 difference in revenue versus those 2 sets of cattle. So what's it cost us to run the 2 rounds of worms, of injection for dewormers, and then the implant? My cowboy math on the napkin over there tells me it's about 13 bucks. And that's even building in some time for running them through the chute, giving you some money for the guns, you know, to give all those types of things. So we're looking at the end of the day about $43 from just taking on those practices as a whole. So for those of us that are cow-calf operators, what are we thinking our margin's going to be per cow this year? Less than $50, and we just manufactured $43. Okay. So now it's a little different setup. It's not apples to apples. I'll grant you that, and that's right. But what I would urge you to think about is there are some ways that we can manufacture some margin even in these low profit times. And that's really what we're sitting in. We're looking at a point where cattle inventory is high. We always know our profits go down on the cow-calf sector that time of the cycle, and that's where we're sitting dead in the middle of, is the plateau of those cow numbers, okay? We all remember 2014, right? Okay, that was the opposite side of that. That's when we were at our shortage point. So our inventory is growing, our profits are gonna be more meager as we work through these times with more cow inventory out there. We manufacture that there. You know, if we look at the handout that I sent around that says the econ of beef technology on the top of it, we're not going to get into dive into all the details on this, but this is just one study that we did out here over this summer. And I will explain these tables a little bit because they're a little counterintuitive when you first look at them. But if you look at that top one that says table 3, if you look at the implant section, that table 3 is for stocker operations on stocker cattle. The average daily gain effect is obviously the boost from a collection of research studies, not just ours individually here. So this is an issue that's had tons of research done on it, and we always like to make it more regional to where we're at, and that's a good thing. But if we look at it as a whole in terms of a review of all of it, and look at what it provides, we generally see the positive average daily gain effect from that. But what I like about this study is that you'll see a break-even price and a cost per head, because I'm an economist, so that's all I understand. But if we look at that, that's a little counterintuitive. What this is telling us is that that is the percent change or the cost change from us not using that technology, okay? So if we remove that implanting from the stocker cattle sector, that would boost our break-even point 2.31%, our price 2.31%. Or if we removed that process from our production system, that would increase our cost per head $18.19 per head. Okay, so that would be how you would interpret this data as you work through this table. And you'll see dewormers, we've got a huge effect on it as well, which obviously is what we focused on here with the implants and dewormers. Average daily gain effect was 17.79%, and then an increased cost of production of almost $21 from not utilizing dewormers, okay? So it's counterintuitive in that we want to look at it and say, if I do this, this is what I get. This is saying if you remove that or don't utilize that, your cost of production would be higher. The other thing that I would add to this table is that this was done in the mid-2000s. So I went back and looked and what the price of cattle were back then, where we would be looking at about 30 cents off or lower than what we're dealing with right now. So if we plug that all back into the system, those percentages and those impacts on cost of production are going to be higher. Even when we look at cost of labor and feed and all that kinds of stuff, those things are going to go higher. So this is an impact that we can look at and look at tons of studies that are behind it and say, in general, just like it did out here today, we can manufacture some of our own margin by utilizing some of these technologies that are out here. And I think that's the big takeaway that we need to look at from this. You know, if you look at table 2, that's the same study, but just on the cow-calf sector, because I knew there'd be some of you guys here that are cow-calf operators. And so you can see the growth promotants there. You know, we've got an increase in break-even price at 5.8% there, just by utilizing, you know, maybe a Ralgrow product or whatever the product is. They're using a bunch of them on the calf sector now that we could utilize on those weaned calves. You know, we go back and look at that as we deal with cow-calf operators. You're usually looking at over 1,000% return on investment on that implant on a pre-weaned calf. I mean, you'd take that in your retirement account, wouldn't you? I mean, it's pretty, we put that application out there in other contexts and we think, well, yeah, of course everybody would do it. But if we look at it, we're only seeing on some of the studies only about a 10% adoption rate on that on cow-calf operators. So I would kind of put the gauntlet down there is that if you're going to retain ownership on a set of cattle like this, and we're going to market them via video, and we're going to gain a premium from that process, you could make an argument there, and depending on what the premium is would tell us, is it worth it or not, and we don't know that right now. But there's at least an argument. But if we're loading cattle up, we're taking them to our local sale barns and things like that, we're really missing manufacturing $20 to $30 a head on that process that we're not capturing by not implanting those calves. And so, you know, we look at it and talk about wanting to make some money on it. There's a really easy spot right there. Now there are debates on your retained heifers and things like that you need to dig into a little bit to see how it fits your operation. But that's certainly something there. So with only 10% adoption, we can really generate some additional profit for us that doesn't cost us anything. You know, one of the things that we see really common is that, well, if we just creep feed those calves, then we'll get that weight out of them. Well, how much feed does $1.50 buy you? How much feed are you going to dump in that creep feeder to get 30 pounds of gain on that calf, or 20 pounds of gain, when we can do it for $1.50 and do it one time, and then I can sit my butt on the couch and watch football rather than go around and filling up creep feeders all weekend? Okay, and so there's a constant investment that we're making there to get an extra, let's say 30 or 40 pounds, and we're going to get, maybe we get a few of them too fat and we get discounted for that, and maybe the rollback takes a little of it. We don't end up with much margin there to work with. But that one implant at that time is going to get us a whole lot further down the road than a lot of these other methods will.